So, hello and welcome to the Out of Program podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jing Ouyang. So today I'm going to be joined by my co-host, Dr. Mohammed Khan, who I'll be interviewing today. Mohammed is a radiology registrar on the cusp of completing his clinical training. He is also the co-founder of RadCast, a community-driven educational platform for radiologists that produces podcasts and also educational courses. So, Mohammed, we've known each other for quite a long time, haven't we?
A long time. I think since 16, since we were both 16, and now we're old and grey. But yeah, 16 years old. We met through a friend, a mutual friend, Abbas. Shout out to Abbas. But yeah, when we were both just finished our GCSEs and entering A-levels, I think that's when we met.
Yes.
And best friends since.
Of course. And I suppose, the interesting thing about our story is that we both pursued medicine and we did a few projects together. But then in terms of our entrepreneurial journeys, we took very different paths, which is something that, we'll hopefully explore during this podcast. So I guess to begin, tell me a bit about your motivations for medicine. What made you choose to study medicine?
I think when you said my motivations, I think we need to take that away and put my parents' motivations for me to do medicine. I think we can both resonate on this. I think career advice when I was applying was very much non-existent, and I still think career advice is a very grey area amongst like secondary school students, like 16-year-olds. It's often a case of you emulate your parents and just follow the path of least resistance. And in my case, it was stability is security, okay? And there's security in stability. That's what my parents' internal motives were. And for them, growing up in Pakistan, for them, it was a doctor or an engineer that was like considered king of the community. And that was replicated in my career choices. Now, I remember being very strong and very quite well versed in chemistry, and I enjoyed it a lot. Found it quite intellectually quite stimulating, and I just enjoyed it. I found it easy. But when I went to talk about pursuing career in chemistry, they were like, "What are you going to do with chemistry? Like, what's the end goal?" And at the age of 16, you don't even know what you want to do, let alone the end goal. Like, even with medicine, I never thought I'd be a radiologist. It would just be like, yeah, let's get a medical degree. That's it. So when I couldn't answer the questions, like what are you going to do with a chemistry degree, I kind of defaulted to their path. Of course, I'm very eternally grateful. I understand their rationale. But in terms of what motivated me, it was more of a combination of my parents' kind of discussions, and also this blend of medicine having this ability to critical think. I did enjoy that. I enjoyed biology. I enjoyed human biology. And I did enjoy blending that together with understanding diseases. I've always enjoyed understanding diseases quite more stimulating than necessarily the patient per se.
And your parents are doctors? Your father is a doctor? Is that right?
Yeah, my dad's a histopathologist, yeah.
And how much pressure did he put on you? Did he actively encourage you, or was it more subconscious?
So the pressure came from my mom, not my dad. So my dad was like a consultant in the NHS, and he was kind of like, look, the reality of medicine is this. I'm trying to give you as much information, but you have to remember, histopathology, for those medics listening in, is very, very distanced from clinical medicine. Like, you don't just leave medical school and become a histopathologist from day one. You have to enter into foundation training, the house job, as it was called back in the day. That's clinical medicine. Even radiology is totally distanced from the clinical wards, the clinics, the theatre. So that perspective is giving kind of a false narrative as to what medicine is, because that's not. It's the first 2 years of foundation training are not like histopathology training or radiology training at all. So despite doing those work experience with my dad, I was kind of getting a false perspective of medicine. And despite that, the reasons for choosing medicine is, once again, for them, it was ensuring stability and security. And I think that was their main motive. Like, we just want to make sure that you guys are stable wherever you end up.
And you talked about an interest in chemistry. Were there any other careers at that age where you were particularly interested? Anything that was very left field?
No, things like drama and music, I never even considered for like a split second. I sucked at both of those things. Things like maths, I was atrocious at. Physics, similar. I never understood these type of things. For me, my strongest points were chemistry and biology. Biology, I don't know if it still is, but I'm sure you'll testify, it was all about rote memorization, and I excelled in that, which was great for medicine. And chemistry, when I went to higher, like A levels, did have a lot more application, which I enjoyed as well. Like, you learn the basics, but then you have to apply in different contexts. But beyond that, no, computer science wasn't a thing. Like, it was IT. It wasn't computer science, called IT, and it was about making like Microsoft Publisher. Like, when's the last time you ever went on Microsoft Publisher to make a leaflet or a flyer? I don't even know if that application still exists. But it was like, how do you manipulate Excel? How do you manipulate Word? How do you manipulate Microsoft Publisher and PowerPoint? So computer science was definitely not a thing back when I was applying.
So I suppose, the options at the time felt quite limited, and the subjects that we were studying, probably didn't point to where modern careers ended up. Once people subsequently graduate and then enter into their professional lives. So we've talked a bit about the motivations in choosing medicine and pursuing it as a subject. You then went on to study medicine at the University of Liverpool. Do you want to talk a bit more about your experiences as a student?
So, when I went into medical school, like, the first thing that you kind of just get really thrust upon you is you realize that there's like this element of like, you're the creme de la creme. You're the crop of the yield. Like, everyone's coming in with like similar, even better grades than you. Like, there was a student in my cohort who was 17. Like, he was a
Wow.
year younger than me, and he was like top in like the country in several subjects, and you're like, what the hell is going on? And it becomes a case of like trying to distinguish yourself amongst the others. But one thing that I will always be forever grateful for when it comes to Liverpool Medical School is case-based learning, or at the time it was called problem-based learning. Not because of problem-based learning, but the principles it taught me, specifically self-motivated and self-independent learning. Because I think if you can grasp that quite quickly, you realize that medical school is just a stepping stone. There is a life after medical school. And I remember within first year, this realization quite quickly came to me. And I think it's because of a careers talk we had. They said, all of you will leave with an MBCHB. All of you. So what's going to differentiate you? And that's actually very true. Like, you do medical school and all of you will be medical graduates. So automatically you're on the same level playing field. So what will then distinguish you? And I remember speaking to like 50 years F1s who were talking about careers and, postgraduate, you got to do this, you got to have this on your CV, like audits, all this kind of stuff. And I remember thinking, what the hell is this? Like, what do I do? And one thing's that, like, from this self-independent learning, I realized, I kind of got an acceptance that, you know what, I don't have to wait till I'm at that stage to do it. I can do it now. And I remember, like, getting presentations quite early on, going to conferences, and others were very perplexed. Like, how the hell are you getting a conference so early on? It's like, well, it's just a case of submitting an abstract and paying money. What conference doesn't want your money? Like, it's just a transaction, okay? But this was quite alien. But from my perspective of medical school, I was very, in that time, very academic driven. That was kind of why I did my intercalated degree, but quickly realized that academia was not for me. Like, I respect those who have this like thirst for knowledge, but it just wasn't me. The time lag between starting and getting something substantial was too significant. It was publish or perish. You're just one grant away from departments closing down. And I was like, this is not the thing. But we, at that time, like 2009, going into like 2015, we were on like this, like a innovation type of curve where e-learning was becoming a thing, YouTube was growing and cultivating as like a medium of knowledge. And I think that's the bug that I bit me.
Yeah, because what it sounds like is that you went into studying medicine very much with an academic mindset. And like many medical students, the immediate alternative path is one of research. But you realize that actually, this wasn't the most fulfilling path for you. Whilst you were studying, you also kind of developed all these new skills that then allowed you to go beyond your conventional training. So now I suppose this brings us to the core of this podcast, which is around alternatives to medicine. And you've kind of alluded to that in relation to your journey in innovation. So I suppose to begin with, what was your motivations for exploring alternatives to medicine?
No, I think one thing you kind of like hit the nail on the head, which kind of will help those listening understand my motives, is the path of least resistance for most medics is academia. It's an established trajectory. It synergizes, if you want to use that MBA term, with medicine. And it just augments your career because anything you do in academia helps you in the clinical path. You can get professor, honorary contracts with universities. It like works very well. But the thing was, when I did all that stuff and I got publications, I got presentations, I won prizes, I was like, is this it? Like, I just didn't felt satisfied. I felt like there's got to be more I can do with the skills I'm developing and will continue to develop as a medic. And it was just that scratch I just couldn't itch. So I did my integrated master's degree. I got the degree after a year. But I was like, I'm glad I did it to realize I didn't want to do this path. That's the main takeaway. But what else can I do with like these skills I'm developing, communication, team working? And naturally, because of my interest in education, it was like trying to build those skills together. I'm not a coder. I've never got those skills. I wish I did, but I enjoyed building. That's why I've enjoyed medicine in the sense that you build a picture of what's going wrong. You understand things like pathophysiology. I always enjoyed that. And I was like, how can I build these things together of things that I enjoy with things that help me give impact at scale? Because I realized that as a doctor, my time is finite. I can only work so many hours in the day. But when I'm sleeping, things aren't happening. So it's a case of like, one of the things, one motto that I've like adopted is like build once, sell twice. With doctor, being a doctor, it's build once, sell once. You see one patient, you treat one patient. You see one scan, you interpret one scan, and then you rinse and repeat. But I wanted something where I could build once and have infinite amount of impact.
That really resonates with me because it's all about innovations that scale. And I think I felt very similarly in my own kind of journey, that I wanted to make a much larger impact than what I could achieve as one individual in a hospital. I suppose that leads us on nicely to talk about some of the innovations that you and I worked on.
Yeah.
And the first one that we pursued together was back in when we were medical students, which was Podlearn. So do you want to share more about what Podlearn was and what you gained from that experience?
So Podlearn was like the fruits of our frustration. So I would always meet Jing, like in summer holidays, winter holidays, Christmas holidays, and we'd always talk. And I really enjoyed the types of teaching Jing would tell me about, his didactic, lecture-based. Some of the most eminent professors would be teaching him about the world-class, I don't know what. And I'd be like, why don't I have access to this? And similarly, Jing would be like, you know what, I really enjoy the way you guys learn, like this group-based, you get a problem, you try and figure out, why don't I have access to what you have? And it made no sense to us because the whole premise of medical school is to make you the best doctor possible so patients get the best treatment. That's what they say in the brochures. And then they're like, come to our university, we've got the best X, Y, and Z. Of course, they don't share resources because they want you to pay their tuition fees and come to their university, and there's an element of prestige. But fundamentally, from a medic's perspective, why aren't you sharing knowledge? All right. And at that time, YouTube, from a learning point, did not really have medical educational content. Osmosis wasn't a thing. Like, it was just a startup at that stage. And Khan Academy had nothing, and it still doesn't, medical. So it was more for basic sciences, but not medical. So it was a kind of combination. I remember speaking to you about this above your KFC flat that kind of had like rats at the time. I remember you telling me. But it was more that, why can't we build a platform where content relating to medicine, built by medical students and like doctors, both foundation doctors all the way up to consultants, share the best knowledge and anyone can access it. And that was the whole premise of Podlearn, like Podlearn. That's what it was called. And yeah, we built it. We got it off the ground. Despite having no coding experience, we of course needed help from others. But the whole premise was to disseminate medical teaching to those who wanted it.
For the benefit of listeners, Mohammed was referring to when I was a medical student at Imperial and lived above a chicken shop that was infested with rats. So times were hard, you know. We didn't always have the riches that we have today. But I suppose going back to what you were describing there, I think a really interesting point is that when we were medical students, we were experiencing certain pain points around being medical students. And that was the thing that you picked up. And I think, you know, for many entrepreneurial journeys, you know, we try and solve the problems that we face on a day-to-day because, you know, we're best placed to understand the struggle. And what you described there was the lack of sharing of medical education between different institutions. We wanted to see if we could develop something that could level the playing field. And essentially what we built was a platform that hosted a range of educational materials that any student from any university could access, and it was quite an impressive achievement, actually, given that we knew nothing about how to build software.
Yeah.
We knew nothing about how to build a business, but we created something relatively popular that we were both very proud of. I wanted to ask you, Mohammed, how did you find working on this alongside your studies? Was that a challenge, or was that actually very doable?
So it was a challenge, and it kind of taught me prioritization, like in the sense that a lot of the time you can do most of these things if you prioritize it, and it's just about your priorities. And you've got to, sometimes it's a bit weird to say, prioritize your priorities. Okay. So if you are someone who doesn't see the value in these type of things, you're never going to do it. You're never going to find the time of day, even though time will exist. Similarly, if you're someone who is frustrated with the clinical training, you will make time for these things. Okay. And the things that I learned as a result of this is, number one, the challenges that you have as a medical student, where you're having exams, are a small tidbit of the life as a doctor. Because as life as a doctor, you have on-calls, family commitments, other commitments, work commitment, portfolio commitments. If you can manage it as a student, you have built the foundations to manage it as a doctor. Okay, you've got that skill, you've got that ability to prioritize time and your priorities. If you can't do it as a student, it honestly just means you may not either enjoy what you're doing, in the sense that project, or two, you don't see value in it, or number three, you're just someone who needs to develop timekeeping like abilities. The main thing, however, I learned from Podlearn, which is the thing that really pushed me to keep delving in and out of like projects, is we live in a time where we just don't need permission anymore. Like, you are able to make a podcast with no permission required. Like, we have done that, me and you, like Jing. This is our first episode. We are co-hosts. We have done that. We have not needed authority. We've not needed a broadcasting license. We've just got our microphones, got our webcams, and done it. Similarly, we live in a world where you can make a website on a WordPress. You don't need anyone's approval. And I think medics struggle with this initially because they come from a mentality where they are expected to join this treadmill along so many other students that lead to a consultant post. And along the way, you get permission to do certain things like, okay, now you're allowed to become a practicing doctor because you got your medical degree and GMC license. Okay, you need to ask the registrar's approval, the consultant's approval. We are embedded to ask for permission. Whereas the world of business does not thrive on approval. It thrives on people going hard, going fast, failing fast, and building to scale. If they find a market, overnight they build a product to satisfy the market. And I think one thing I would like to tell the listeners, whoever's listening, is just do it. Let the permission come later. Okay? Because most of the time you'll realize, wait a minute, nobody has stormed my house. The FBI haven't raided my house. Okay? And number two, in fact, most people will be your biggest fans. All right? But if you put permission as a barrier to start, then eventually you will never start. And me and Jing were facing this about this podcast, like co-hosting it. Paralysis by over-analysis. You'll be like, okay, do I need to ask my head of school, the dean of medicine for permission? Do I need to ask my training program director? Just do it and it will fall into place. And that's I think, forever grateful I will be. I said that like Yoda, but I will forever be grateful for Podlearn for just teaching me to do. Because I was very reserved. I was like, no, Jing, we need to get some permission. We need to have this ready. And I think you were kind of, from your own experience from Imperial, which we'll talk about in the next episode, you kind of just went, let's go. Let's just do it. Let's just turn up to this hackathon. Doesn't matter.
I was certainly very impatient and had a naive optimism to me for sure. But I suppose then, what happened next with Podlearn? Was it a huge success? What was the outcome for you and I?
Yeah, if it were a huge success, you're going to be here. It was more of a case that we didn't know what we were building. We had a image of what we wanted. We had like a dream, but the reality is the dream just didn't materialize because we didn't understand the process is. And whilst we had the ability to hustle, and hustle isn't a bad word. I'll say that to anyone listening. Hustle is not a bad word. Please, it has bad connotations and people get a negative impression, but it just means someone who is grinding, like, to get things done with hurdles in the way. Like, wherever comes in the way, they will find a way to meander around it because they just want to see the thing come to fruition. And I think whilst we had the vision, and I think we were on the same page of the vision, we then realized this wasn't a business. Like, the business fundamentals just didn't exist, or we didn't appreciate what those were because we had no understanding of them. We thought, and mainly I probably thought, that once we've built it, it's done. Like, we're done. We can part ways. Like, you finish an audit, you do it, and you move on, and you just go off to another audit. But then Amazon Web Service came along and said, thank you very much, guys, for uploading all these gigabytes of data. Here's the bill. And by the way, this bill is reflective of the amount you use. So if you want this to keep growing, Jeff Bezos is going to get more and more books. And we were like, okay, that means we need to monetize. But we did not know what monetization meant. Like, what does monetization can take many forms: a single fee, a membership fee, a one-off fee, whatever. But we were like, what do we do? And before we know it, I think we just realized that we didn't, and like I'll say myself, didn't have at that stage of my career the means to continue. I had learned what I needed to have learned, and I had gone to the end of my trajectory with Podlearn. I wasn't the right person to take it to the next steps at that stage of my career.
as with many kind of projects, you can see success in one area. For example, we built a library of an incredible amount of content. We had users, but then as soon as the AWS bill hit, and this wasn't even that much in the grand scheme of things, I think it was about £200. We got scared and we shut it all down. And I suppose, so that's the first project that we did together. Then when we became junior doctors, when we graduated from medical school, we started on a second project called Our Healthy Future. So do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
So this was now foundation training. So me and Jing, I'd gone to Manchester. Jing was in Liverpool doing his academic foundation program. So I was at that stage of my career very much focused on endocrine. I wanted to do that as a specialty. My master's was in obesity and endocrinology. I had multiple academic achievements in that remit. This is where I thought I was going. And one of the things at that time, and it's still relevant now, is the obesity crisis. It's not going anywhere and it's getting worse. But one of the things that was getting a lot of attention was public awareness or knowledge of obesity at a young age, because they said the early years are where, if there's teaching on healthy living, how to brush your teeth, it has a meaningful impact. So I thought, wait a minute, why can't we go downstream and teach them? Once again, for those listening, you're going to see this silver strand of education in my journey, and it continues. But I was like, okay, how can we educate them? And one thing I remember as a kid, and I'm not sure if you had one, Jing, was a lunchbox. It was like a physical lunchbox. It had different segments. My mom would put a sandwich here, packet of crisp, a chocolate there. I thought, you know what, this is a pretty cool basic concept. Take a lunchbox, segment it, and put different teaching tools, 5 a day, healthy brushing, whatever, into those different remits. And that was called Our Healthy Future. And it was basically, in essence, a community-backed enterprise where we would go out to schools and teach on healthy living and develop resources around healthy living and dietary advice, etc., for kids.
And what did that experience teach you?
Number one, to have a niche. Even now, despite saying what I said about Our Healthy Future, I still can't understand what it was. And I think it digressed or just evolved into a consultancy group where we would advise in our capacity as doctors. And I put that in, for those of you not watching on video, in big quotation marks, doctors, foundation doctors per se, just remember that, into a consultancy group where we would help other initiatives and kind of clinically, to some degree, validate their resources. Okay, does it make sense from a medicine perspective? Is it clinically relevant, clinically appropriate? But this highlights the emphasis and necessity of a niche. If you do not have a niche that you can pinpoint with the tip of your fingernail, you are going in blind. And the more you can basically, in your mind's eye, see the customer in front of you clearly, the better your chances of success are. If you can't visualize who your customer is, you're basically catering for all, which means you're catering for none. Because how do you build a business where you can have a marketing strategy that gets all the billions of population that we have? You can't, right? You just can't. So it highlighted, number one, the necessity of a niche. We didn't have a niche. Our Healthy Future did not have a niche, and the niche of healthy living was too broad. What does that mean? Is it exercise? Is it mental health? Is it physical health? Is it social inequalities that you're tackling? What does health mean? Health, by definition, is so broad. So already we did not have a niche, and I think that was another thing that I took really away from Our Healthy Future was this concept of a niche. The second thing is, and I think this is the reflection of just people getting how communities work, is that when you come to people with ideas that, oh, I'm going to build this, I'm going to do that, they all get excited. They really do get excited with you, and they motivate you to continue. But the motivation and this excitement does not last for long. And it's your job as the founder to take that as kind of like a thrust, like some jet fuel to propel you. But without this internal driver and internal like necessity to get things done, these projects just fizzle out. And one thing I will say is this word entrepreneur. I'm not going to put words in your mouth, Jing. We'll wait for the next episode. But I do not like this word. All right? I do not like saying I am an entrepreneur. I'll never say that, and I never claim to be. Because you don't want to be an entrepreneur, in my opinion. This is my opinion. You want to be a successful business person, right? You want to take an idea, build it, scale it, sell it, or continue to thrive in it. What you don't want to do is become a CV entrepreneur. All right? Oh, I started this project back in 20 whatever, and now I've gone on to this other thing, and I've gone on to this other thing, gone on to this other thing. Try and either build and fail, which is fine. You can fail, and if you are going to fail, just fail. There's no shame in it. But build and be successful in what you do. All right? Don't accumulate ideas or projects on a CV. It's no point. It's no point.
So I think you touch upon a really interesting point. I mean, firstly, I think the term entrepreneur has now been romanticized and is, seen almost as distinct as that of being a business person, which I think is worth calling out. But you touch upon a very interesting point that I want to just drill into a bit more, which is around your CV. Because I think what you're alluding to there is, and this is something that we've seen throughout our careers, we're guilty of this as well, I suspect, but we've seen it of our peers, which is that they pursue innovations and ventures, not purely to make those ventures a success, but from an optics perspective, they look good in the context of your professional CV. So then you can apply for your specialty training or your consultant posts. So turning that question on to you then, Mohammed, do you think you had the right motivations when you started Our Healthy Future? Do you think this was a CV play, or do you think you meaningfully wanted to create a successful organization?
So I think what we're talking about is traditional currencies. This is how I view the academic CV or the medical CV. So we have traditional currencies, and I say a few of them are audits, quality improvement projects, publications, teaching experiences, and degrees. Those are our traditional currencies that we like to get into the bank and let it gather investment. That's what we like to invest in. That's what we like to put in the bank and save away for a rainy day, basically specialty applications or consultancy jobs. The thing with many innovations is that people start with in my opinion, with the perspective that this is going to be as a minimum, a nice icebreaker. Okay? And I did talk about Podlearn at my radiology interview, and it did make them happy. They were like, oh, wow. But for me, and I'm being totally blunt with you, and this is what the Out of Program podcast is about, the concept of a business just never entered my mind. Like, I did not know that transition was possible. And number two, I didn't know how to make that transition because I didn't go in with that mentality. Okay? And that's the difference that I would say to the listeners. When you are looking at things that come to you, like, oh, do you guys want to, guys, for most medical students, let's be honest, they start with teaching and education. Or we'll make a question bank for the multi-specialty recruitment assessment. Or we'll make a question bank for the USMLE or for the UK MLO, the medical licensing assessment. Sorry, the UK MLA. Think about it in the sense that, okay, is this a business or is this a project? Because number one, if you are all on the same page going into a project, your outcomes will all be agreeable, right? If you think it's a business, the thing that you need to focus on is longevity, and longevity comes through money, all right? Things in the big bad world cost. Amazon Web Servers, hosting, domains. We've had to pay for this podcast recording. Things aren't free. And if you're relying on goodwill, then just remember goodwill is very finite. And getting grants and charity type of donation is very difficult. It's very difficult. And you're just always one step away from not getting it. Okay? And I think with Podlearn and Our Healthy Future, those were the stepping stones of me coming to the point where I was like, these are just projects. Now I want to build a business. Because the thing that I really got annoyed with, and I get annoyed with seeing in other things, is these one-hit entities. They come, exist for a few months, and then die. Okay? And especially in the medical education space, there are a dime a million of these. They come in for 1 year, exist, and then go and fizzle out. Because those creators did not build a way to sustain. And I think that is a shame for the end user. Because when you build a relationship with your user, your customer, they, in essence, give you something which they have kind of given you money for, which is trust. That I trust you to give me the service. And if you then fizzle out and go away and die out as a company, that trust has been broken. And I think that's something I would tell any prospective founder is when you're thinking of, especially medical students, when projects come your way, quickly decide if this is a CV thing or is this a business. Businesses will look good on a CV. They do. They look very impressive because, especially when you're founders, you are developing all these soft skills that medics love to talk about in interviews, like at a million miles an hour, because you're having to build quickly and learn all these skills about hiring, firing, building teams, scaling, working with other people. But if it's just a project, that's fine. That's okay as well. But if it's a business, then start thinking about longevity.
So then, speaking about businesses, this brings us closer to present day. Yeah. Your third act, as it were, was RadCast. So tell us a bit about RadCast. How did it come about? And how are you taking the lessons from Podlearn and Our Healthy Future into this new venture that you started?
So RadCast was also another interesting kind of concept. So radiology was never on my map as a career, as both an undergrad and as a postgrad, like in my foundation years. But then through some life-changing events and just like opportunities coming at my door, blind luck kind of thing, radiology entered into my domain, and I started to look into a lot more. And I remember thinking, why are the competition ratios for this specialty so ridiculously high? This was back in 2018, 2019. Yet nobody knows about this specialty. Like, it doesn't add up, right? Like, everybody knows about orthopedics, neurosurgery, cardiology, and those competitive ratios are reflected in the application. And that makes sense. If everyone knows about it, everyone's going to apply for it. But radiology, nobody knows about it. And then all of a sudden, it's so overly competitive. And this mismatch was curious to me. I was like, why is this existing? And I quickly kind of identified that when people learn about radiology, it becomes really interesting to them. And they're like, this is a career I really want to do. So it was more of an optics problem. Radiology was not known about because radiology is a very distinct back of the hospital, ground floor or basement type of specialty. It's not out in the open. As a medical student, our rotations would be like 1 day with the histopathologist, 1 day with the radiologist, but 3 weeks with the cardiologist. So we never got to sit with them and appreciate what they do as a career. So once I realized it was an optics problem, I was like, okay, how could we better, in essence, shine a light? And of course, 2018, 2019 podcasts were in vogue. Joe Rogan with his thing. It was the cool thing to do. And because of Podlearn and Our Healthy Future, I knew, or I had this belief that I didn't need permission. Like, I could do this. And secondly, with the knowledge that I had of education, I was like, okay, I can put the ingredients together. I now have, at that stage, I had an inkling of what the recipe was and I had the ingredients. So I started to bake that cake. Once I got into radiology, I now had that leverage, that authority to be interviewing or working on a radiology kind of podcast initiative. So we started interviewing really eminent people in the world of radiology, from college presidents to people working in artificial intelligence in America, our colleagues down in Australia, and kind of putting a spotlight into a specialty kind of known for being in the dark. Okay. And fundamentally, at this stage, it was a project. But if you remember what I just said, I was like, no, this has to survive. Because not myself and my co-founders were at different stages of our training. I was coming in, my colleagues, Uzi and Jamie, who are also now consultant radiologists, they were coming, they were either in halfway through their training and as we progressed, getting to the end of their training. And I knew that once you get your CCT, the world kind of opens up to you. You're a consultant radiologist, you can now do private practice, you can now look abroad. There has to be a reason to continue giving your time, which is precious, to making podcasts. And you have to be able to motivate your peers and motivate those that are working with you on the journey. Each of them will have different drivers. So for me, having Podlearn and Our Healthy Future, I was like, okay, this has to survive the transitions that we will have in our career, notably become a consultant. And that's when we realized, okay, there has to be a business element to this. And of course, radiology being so competitive, the natural pull was to try and support these applicants in that application journey. And then that opened up the whole remit of e-learning that I could bring in Podlearn, building communities that I could bring from Our Healthy Future. But fundamentally, through my mistakes previously, I knew that at the heart of RadCast is a business. The podcasts are a nice community touch, but fundamentally we are a business where we do want to build community-driven courses.
I mean, that's great. I suppose what I'm hearing is you found a niche, and you took all the lessons from your previous experiences and applied them to create something that was self-sustaining and rewarding. And I think importantly, you chose different co-founders this time round. You binned me off and picked Jamie and Uzi. So who knows what exactly it was that led to the success? We can only speculate. But I suppose then you created RadCast when you were in clinical training. So you were already a doctor at this point, which leads me to ask, how do you find this building and scaling a business alongside progressing through your clinical training? Because radiology is not easy.
No, it's not. I would say this strategy is not for the weak. And I don't mean it in the sense that you have to be physically strong. It's very draining, especially when you bootstrap. And when I say bootstrap, there was no boot. I don't think there was laces. At some points, you're literally trying to save pennies on the pound. And that can be very challenging navigating when you will also have demands of your training. And I was someone who, before in medical school, I was flying colors. I was passing everything on first time. In radiology, the stepping stone is huge and it is rigorous. It's not something that you can just breeze through. It will push you, it will test you, because the learning curve for radiology is steep. Okay. And I did fail some of my postgraduate exams, notably the 2A, on multiple occasions. I do hold my hand up. It is a battle scar that I do have. But once again, as I mentioned with Podlearn and also Our Healthy Future, it's about prioritizing your priorities. The impact I was seeing with RadCast was significantly more than I had with my scanning reports. In essence, the volume. I was meeting people or speaking to people across the world People were emailing us from like Australia, America, trying to get onto the podcast. We would see like YouTube videos. One of my chest X-ray videos has like over 100,000 views. Like that's staggeringly and very humbling that this was the reach that you could have with a very niche podcast. Like we not only found our niche, we found like a super niche, like radiologists. Like that's not doctors, that's a niche of a niche. Okay? And that's what I mean about niches are so important. But it was about time management and having founders who understand. Of course, Jamie and Uzi knew what I was going through because they had gone through it themselves, right? They were like 2 or 3 years ahead of me. So they knew when I had exams, I was out the picture. And it's being about open with your founders. And I just told them, listen, I've got my exams. You know what it's like. Don't expect anything from me. I'll be around for important decisions, but otherwise, I'm AWOL. And similarly, it's about being able to delegate, and especially amongst founders in a bootstrap company. All right, you're not above things. And I'll say that very openly again. You are not above things. If you need to do an Instagram post, you do it. It's not beneath you. All right, especially when you're bootstrapping, you can find tools to help automate and kind of synchronize things. But if things need to be done, you need to be the first to put your hand up and say, I'll do. All right. And I think that's one thing that I got from a bootstrap venture, in the sense that it was all hands on deck. Everyone gets their hands dirty. Everyone builds. Everyone scales. But the other thing that I learned from RadCast with being a clinician is, in essence, if you are going to continue a clinical career with your hustle, your project, your business, try to align to a North Star. Like RadCast, courses and podcasts in radiology works very nicely when you are a radiologist. Okay? If I was building like, I don't know, like an OnlyFans account, then I think I would have had a few issues along the way. But because I aligned, maybe like just through sheer luck again, the stars, it really helped navigate one from the other, because I could leverage my training with RadCast. RadCast would then give me opportunities in radiology, which I could then utilize. And it worked very nicely. I think when the project that you are trying to build is very 180 from what you're doing clinically, it can become more difficult. Not impossible, but more difficult. So that's something I would encourage those that are thinking of staying in medicine to do what they want to do, like to think about. But also remember, your doctor title will help open the door. In essence, being a doctor will kind of already have that door askew. You just need to put your foot in it. And people are very receptive, especially those outside of medicine, to speak with doctors. You'll be surprised at the amount of emails I've had where I've just cold called. Like, hi, I'm Dr. Khan. They're like, oh, yeah, happy to jump on a Zoom with you. Love to hear about what you're doing. I think we have this perspective that everybody will think our idea sucks and that everything will be doom and gloom. But you'll be surprised at how many people will be very eager to hear about what you want to do and support you to the best of their abilities.
I mean, it's interesting that the first alternative idea you had was OnlyFans. I think that speaks volumes to where your mind is at. But I guess, what it sounds like it was challenging to balance, a tough career in radiology alongside a bootstrapped business, but also very rewarding. And I think you benefited from the synergies of doing something, of having a venture that was in radiology, which is the same profession that you're progressing in. And I think that certainly helped. I suppose then, looking back on that experience, do you have any regrets, or would you do things differently? I suppose the main question is, if you were to go back in time, would you have left medicine to pursue this venture, given how successful it is today?
The thing is, like, the grass is always greener mentality, I think, is one that is very filled with thorns. And the reason why is because I always had this notion. I remember having this, like, oh, I wish I did this. I wish I did chemistry. Like that's something I could have said. But would I have been a success in that? The automatic presumption is yes. But why? I could have been an absolute fail. I could have dropped out. I could have sucked. I could have gone into chemistry year one, realized I suck balls at this, and then had to drop out. Right? Most startups fail. And that's not what you see in the world. You see success because success drives the Instagram algorithm, not you waking up at 10 p.m. when you should have woken up at 2 a.m. and gone and meditated and done yoga. So I think people's perception is incorrectly one that if they had done the alternative, it would have led to success. That's not categorically true. You could have really hindered your abilities and your trajectory. I think the best thing I think about when I reflect on this is what would I have leapfrogged into? And at that stage of my career, having done an F3 year, I did consultancy work. I did explore alternative careers. And I realized it just wasn't for me. Because I would advise those who are seriously thinking about leaving medicine is please try and get your foot in the door and tip your toes in the water, because you may find that it's boiling hot or freezing cold. It's not perfect Goldilocks temperature, all right? It may scald you, all right? And this current like atmosphere of I'm going to go into consultancy work. I'm going to go into the big three. I'm going to go into finance. Medicine has been the thing that you've lived and breathed for, let's say, 5 years or 6 years if you've done like an intercalated degree, or maybe you've got like a postgraduate degree in medicine. It's the thing you understand best. So the first thing you should try to do is see if there's a career in medicine that tailors to your needs. Okay, you'll see in the Outer Program podcast, we've got general surgeons, we've got so many other subspecialties within medicine who have built as that specialist. I'm a radiologist, I've done it, and I'm sure you can do it too. But if you are aware of those other specialties and you're like, this is not for me, then try and get as much exposure as you can with the comfort blanket of your medical degree. So for example, try and get like an F3 year, try and go to the big three, try and do these things to see if it is for you. It may be a case that you've just become frustrated with the path to get to where you want in medical. For example, entrance exams for your specialty training, building the portfolio, finding it difficult. If you identify the frustrations that are leading you to think to leave medicine, you can possibly identify ways to alleviate those. And I think for me, I honestly say, what would I have gone into? I wouldn't have gone into. I didn't have that exit.
And final question from me then is, what's next for you?
So I think for me now, the registrar or the resident life is coming to an end. And now it's this final leapfrog from a medical perspective into CCT. And I think now it's about trying to navigate that with the things that I'm working on and trying to make sure that once again they align. Because I think being a CCT consultant or consultant is a superpower. I think it's one that's very undervalued. And I'm talking about a superpower outside of medicine. Because I think being a consultant in the NHS is you can pull a lot of levers and have a lot of leverage to, number one, have domain expertise, because that is what CCT is telling those around you. It tells fellow medics that this is a specialist, and it tells those around you that this is a specialist. And number two, when it comes to trying to leverage your identity in the world outside of medicine, I always tell people you will be so surprised as to how much people value you with authority outside of medicine. Because we speak with medics and our communities are all medics, we kind of like talk about the negatives, or we kind of like this doom and gloom. But when you go speak to someone who is, for example, an engineer, they hold you with such high regard because you say your name is Dr. Khan. Rightly or wrongly, that's a different discussion. But they value your conversation, they value your time, and they value what you do for a career. And it's kind of nice to be told, good job. Like, good job. Like, keep it up. And like, actually, I do good. And all of you who are medics, or who did medicine even, you do good and you did good. And I think it's just about getting that realization that, wait a minute, I have got a lot of experience. I do have a lot of knowledge. I do have those skills, because all of you, by definition, as medics, are very hardworking. You're very diligent, and you are very detail orientated people. And those skills, in the right environment, can just take you to like places you never thought were possible.
Brilliant. Now I have the last question. Final question. What is one book that you would recommend to listeners?
So one book would be, for me, it's The Pathless Path. All right. It was a book that I found inadvertently, probably scrolling through Reddit forums late at night. And for those of you who are in medicine, who are now at a crossroads where you're confused, because both myself and Jing, and you'll hear in the next episode with Jing's type of own journey, but I remember thinking to myself, what do I do now? And it's very hard to kind of understand when medicine puts you on a treadmill with one direction, and it doesn't give you the opportunity to meander. And any form of meandering is considered wrong. That's like the perception. So your thought that you're on a conveyor belt to CCT, all right? And you're now thinking, I want to just step off for a bit, go explore another machine, maybe go on the rowing machine this time. But no, stay on the treadmill. And I think when you don't have someone who has done it before, or someone who's doing it now, basically a lack of a mentor, you are very lost. And I found this book, The Pathless Path, at the right time and at the right place, because it told me, or gave me the tools to say, no, this is perfectly normal. All right. You are now at a crossroads where you feel like you can do more and you want to do more, and doing more is perfectly fine. And in fact, it gave me like tools to kind of help dip my toes in the water and see what those alternatives are. Because honestly, like, if you don't get ready for this, it's going to hit you smack in the face when you see CT. Because the conveyor belt has stopped. The conveyor belt, the NHS said, thank you, good job. And now that's it. And you will be a consultant longer than you are a trainee. So the pathless path, if it doesn't start now as a medical student, as a foundation doctor, as a specialty registrar or resident, guess what? It's going to start as a CCT consultant when you're like, what do I do now? And they're like, revalidation is the minimum. But apart from that, it's up to you. So the pathless path gave me that tool to be like, okay, this is fine. This is normal. And number two, it is doable. And I think hopefully with this Out of Program podcast, we give you guys insights into people that have also been on that pathless path. Myself, Jing, 2 already that you have in your bank, and perhaps be mentors for you guys to say, okay, they did it, so why can't I? And you can. There's nothing stopping you.
Yeah, I think that concept of being on a treadmill is very familiar, and I think it'll be familiar for a lot of people listening in. And it sounds like even, probably very relevant for those at the start of their careers as they figure out, how they build those kind of alternative paths. But even for people like you and I who have, seen success in other fields and are now in uncharted territories. So it sounds like a really good suggestion. Right.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you, Mohammed, for the interview.
Pleasure.
That was very enriching. So that's all the time we have. I guess that's the end of the episode. Tune in next time where we'll be turning the tables and Mohammed will be interviewing me on my journey. Make sure you follow Outer Program, subscribe, smash the like button, whatever it is people do these days, and look forward to seeing you all next time.
Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.